Welcome to Solo Stories number 18, The Last Hike by Meeks. Thanks for listening to our new story. Sit back, relax, lock the doors and check out this eerie tale. The city never sleeps, neither did Shane. His days were a blur of numbers, meetings and the relentless pursuit of success. He thrived in the fast-paced world of finance, a master of the universe confined to his glass and steel tower. His life was a symphony of ringing phones, stock tickers and the low hum of ambition. It was everything he thought he wanted, but something was missing. And sometimes late at night he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched from above. Weekends were for hiking. They were a chance for Shane to trade his tailored suits for worn denim and hiking boots. His luxury car, a symbol of city success, sat idle in the garage as he opted for the rugged reliability of his older Ford Bronco. It was a vehicle more suited to the rough terrain and unpredictable weather of his mountain escapes. Every trail, every peak conquered was a victory, a reminder that there was more to life than the confines of his city existence. Shane meticulously researched each hike, poring over maps and trail reviews with the same intensity he brought to his financial analyses. He craved the challenge, the physical exertion, a welcome contrast to his mentally demanding work. There was a particular thrill in exploring new trails, venturing into uncharted territory. It mirrored the risks he took in the financial world, but with a rawness and unpredictability that both excited and terrified him. This weekend, his sights were set on a remote area, a densely wooded region known for its challenging terrain and breathtaking scenery. He had Ashley, a woman who matched his ambition. Their schedules were a constant juggling act. They found solace in their shared drive. Their relationship was a modern love story. They celebrated milestones with expensive wine. They understood the language of success. Ashley worried about Shane's need for solitude, his frequent escapes into the wilderness. She couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. Despite her concerns, Ashley knew better than to hold Shane back. She settled for a compromise, extracting a promise from him to be careful. The apartment was quiet. Shane moved methodically, gathering his gear. Every item had its place, meticulously organized. His backpack lay open on the floor. First the essentials, a compass and map. He traced the route with his finger. A shiver of anticipation ran down his spine. The thrill of the unknown called to him. Next, the tools of survival. A multi-tool. A fire starter nestled in its waterproof pouch, a first aid kit, stocked for any eventuality. He checked each item with practiced efficiency. The apartment transformed into a staging ground. His hiking boots stood at attention by the door. A canvas tent leaned against the wall. Each piece of equipment represented freedom. Ashley's voice, a soothing melody in the symphony of his thoughts, crackled through the phone's speaker. "Be careful, Shane," she murmured, her concern palpable even through the digital ether. "That area is supposed to be really remote." Her words were a gentle tether, a reminder of the life he was leaving behind. He reassured her, injecting his voice with false confidence. "Don't worry," he said, forcing a chuckle. "I'll be fine. Just a little weekend getaway. I'll be back before you know it." But even as he spoke the words, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. Ashley's intuition had always been sharp. Her concern, usually easily dismissed, lingered like a bad omen. The engine of his Ford Bronco roared to life, a welcome counterpoint to the silence of the pre-dawn city. The vehicle, a relic of a simpler time, felt reassuringly solid beneath his hands. It was a workhorse, not a status symbol, and right now, that's exactly what he needed. He pulled out of the parking garage, the city still shrouded in darkness. The streets were deserted, save for the occasional taxi and a few bleary-eyed delivery drivers. He had the road to himself, a ribbon of asphalt stretching out before him like a promise of escape. As he drove, the city gradually gave way to suburbs, then farmland, the buildings shrinking and the spaces between them growing wider. The air, thick with exhaust fumes and the smell of concrete, slowly gave way to the sweet scent of pine and damp earth. With each passing mile, he could feel the tension draining from his shoulders. The gravel parking lot was nearly empty. A few other vehicles were scattered around, their occupants already vanished into the woods. Shane pulled his Bronco into an empty spot, the tires crunching on the loose stones. The engine ticked as it cooled, the silence broken only by the distant chirping of birds. He stepped out of the vehicle, stretching his limbs after the long drive. The air was noticeably cooler here, the city heat replaced by the crisp, pine-scented breath of the mountains. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. This was his happy place, where the noise and demands of his city life faded into the background. The trailhead beckoned, a narrow opening in the dense foliage. A weathered sign marked the beginning of his journey, the trail name painted in faded letters, Hemlock Hollow. He shouldered his backpack, adjusting the straps to distribute the weight evenly. His boots crunched on the gravel as he started down the path, leaving behind the last vestiges of civilization. As the day wore on, the trail grew steeper, switchbacking up the mountainside. Shane fell into a rhythm, his breath coming in steady gasps as he navigated the rocky terrain. He was no stranger to physical exertion, but the altitude and the weight of his pack were starting to take their toll. He paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow and taking a long drink from his water bottle. He glanced at his watch, surprised by how quickly the time had passed. The sun was already starting its descent, casting long shadows that stretched and danced in the fading light. He needed to find a suitable campsite before darkness enveloped the forest entirely. The trail took an unexpected turn, leading him deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the last rays of sunlight. Despite his unease, Shane pushed onward, determined to find a campsite before nightfall. The trail led him to a small clearing, a welcome respite from the oppressive darkness of the surrounding woods. A stream gurgled nearby, its water clear and cold. He decided this would be his home for the night. He set about making camp with practiced efficiency, setting up his tent and gathering firewood. As darkness descended, he built a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the surrounding trees. He sat on a fallen log, warming his hands over the fire, a sense of unease settling over him. The forest had grown quiet, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes were upon him. The flames danced in the darkness, casting flickering shadows that morphed into grotesque shapes at the edge of the firelight. Shane huddled closer to the warmth, pulling his jacket tighter around him. The night air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, but there was another smell too, faint yet unmistakable, metallic like blood. He tried to ignore it, to focus on the crackling fire and the rhythmic chirping of crickets, but the smell lingered, growing stronger with each gust of wind. His heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the night. He felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warmth of the fire. The whispers started again, fainter this time, more insidious. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with unsettling dreams. Images flickered through his mind, twisted branches reaching for him, eyes glowing in the darkness, the metallic scent of blood growing stronger. He woke with a start, his heart racing, covered in a cold sweat. The fire had burned down to embers, casting a faint glow on the surrounding trees. The forest was silent, but the air crackled with an unseen energy. He could feel it pressing in on him, suffocating him. He scrambled out of his tent, desperate for air, for space, for anything familiar. He paced the small clearing, his breath misting in the cold air. As Shane rubbed his eyes, there was a blue-white glow that came from above the trees. The tree's canopy was so thick he could not make out what was putting off this glow. As he walked around his little camp area, trying to get a good look at this object hovering above the forest, it shot off towards the north and was gone in a matter of a couple of seconds. Panic surged through him, cold and sharp. He grabbed his backpack, stuffing his sleeping bag and supplies inside with trembling hands. He had to get out of there, find somewhere safe. But where? The forest seemed to press in on all sides, a labyrinth with no exit. He glanced back at the approaching footsteps, now just beyond the edge of the clearing. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to run. He plunged into the darkness, crashing through the undergrowth, his heart pounding in his chest. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, his last lifeline to the outside world. He flipped it open, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. No signal. He moved to higher ground, desperately searching for a bar, 2 bars, anything. But the result was the same. He was alone. He tried calling Ashley, his fingers fumbling over the keys. The phone went straight to voicemail. He tried 911, his voice a choked whisper. Nothing. Shane ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. The forest floor was a blur of shadows and tangled undergrowth beneath his feet. Branches whipped at his face, tearing at his clothes. But he didn't dare slow down. The sound of his pursuer was always there, a relentless rhythm that echoed his own frantic heartbeat. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, legs screaming for respite. But fear lent him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He had to keep moving. Had to stay one step ahead of whatever lurked in the darkness behind him. The forest seemed to twist around him, a disorienting maze with no escape. Familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by an endless procession of gnarled trees and impenetrable shadows. He was lost, utterly and terrifyingly lost. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the sound of pursuit stopped. Shane skidded to a halt, his chest heaving, listening for any sign, any sound at all. But there was nothing, only the heavy silence of the forest closing in around him. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. The silence was almost worse than the chase. It was a living, breathing thing, pressing in on him from all sides, filled with unseen eyes and unheard whispers. He strained to hear anything over the pounding of his own blood in his ears, the slightest rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the whisper of movement in the darkness. But the forest held its breath, holding him captive in its silent grip. And then he heard it, faint at first, a mere whisper on the edge of his hearing, his name. Softly spoken, almost a sigh, but filled with a chilling malice that sent shivers down his spine. He whirled around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing there, just the endless rows of trees, their branches intertwined overhead, forming a suffocating canopy that blocked out the moon and stars. He was alone, yet surrounded, hunted by something he couldn't see, couldn't understand. In the distance, the light reappeared, the same blue and white light he saw earlier. Shane thought to himself after getting a glimpse of it in a clearing, "That looks like some kind of craft, something I'm not familiar with." He stumbled forward, driven by a primal instinct to escape. His legs ached, his throat was parched, but he didn't dare stop. And then, through the trees, he saw it. A glimmer of moonlight reflecting off churning water. A river. Relief cut through his terror. He could follow the river downstream to safety. The water was fast-moving, tugging at his legs. He reached the opposite bank, exhausted but exhilarated. But the forest held a new terror, a sense of oppressive dread. He pushed on, following the river's course, his clothes soaked through, his body trembling with cold and fear. The trees thinned, giving way to a rocky outcrop overlooking the water. He scrambled up, desperate for a vantage point. From his vantage point, he could see the river stretching out before him. But there was something else, something unnatural. The trees on the opposite bank seemed to writhe and twist, their branches reaching out like claws. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, but the image remained. The forest itself seemed to be alive, a malevolent entity. He hadn't escaped at all. He had been herded, driven like prey to this spot. His phone, useless for so long, suddenly buzzed in his pocket. A flicker of hope flared in his chest. A signal? Rescue? He fumbled for the device, his fingers clumsy with cold and fear, but the screen remained blank, the battery finally drained. He looked back at the river, its surface now reflecting the faintest hint of dawn. The forest was silent, the air thick with anticipation. He was out of time. Suddenly, above the trees, a bright light appeared. Shane was trying to get a good look at whatever this object was. He thought to himself, "Is it a helicopter? Maybe the search and rescue found me." His excitement turned quickly to concern. This was not a helicopter. No sound, just this deep humming that felt like it vibrated into his soul. A beam of light cascaded down like a spotlight on Shane. At that moment it was too late, he simply vanished. Days passed. Days that bled into an agonizing blur of worry and dread for Ashley. Shane was gone. He never returned from his hike. The silence from him was deafening. Her calls went straight to voicemail. This wasn't like Shane, he was meticulous. The thought of him lost and alone gnawed at her sanity. The call to the authorities was the hardest thing Ashley had ever done. Each word felt thick and foreign, choked out through a throat constricted with fear. She relayed the details of Shane's planned hiking trip, the remote location, the lack of any contact. The response was swift, but the news was grim. Search and rescue teams combed the area. Days turned into weeks, hope flickering like a candle in the wind. The forest, once a place of solace, now held the weight of his disappearance. The trails he'd researched offered no clues, no trace of his passage. The search team, complied of volunteers, police and fire and rescue, finally came across Shane's last camping spot. Everything was there, and it seemed untouched. His tent was set up. Inside the tent was his sleeping bag, personal items. Shane's camping spot looked as though he would be back any minute. Nothing was ransacked, nothing was damaged. Outside his tent, you could see where he had a campfire, but it had burned out. A log that he used to sit on by the fire. Everything appeared normal, but Ashley and his friends and family knew it was anything but normal. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The official search was called off after a month of scouring the unforgiving terrain. But Shane was gone. Another unsolved mystery. Ashley refused to give up. She returned to the forest, her heart aching. She distributed flyers, contacted news outlets. The forest offered no solace, no answers. It stood as a silent, indifferent observer. The Bronco, once a symbol of Shane's adventurous spirit, now sat idle in Ashley's driveway, a painful reminder of his absence. She couldn't bring herself to move it, to disrupt the last vestige of his presence in her life. She clung to the memories, the echo of his laughter, the warmth of his touch, the shared moments of joy and adventure. But even those were fading, slowly being consumed by the encroaching shadows of his disappearance. The forest held its silence, a silence pregnant with unspoken truths and chilling possibilities. Shane was gone, lost to the wilderness, his fate a mystery that gnawed at the edges of reason. And somewhere, in the heart of that vast, indifferent expanse, something unseen stirred, its grip on the missing hiker tightening with each passing season. Some townfolk and local police whispered of a UFO sighting, a light in the sky the night he vanished, hinting at an abduction beyond this world. People had come forward, and there were several reports of a UFO in the area where Shane disappeared. As for Shane's girlfriend and his family, they will never know the truth. Shane literally vanished into thin air. Another unsolved mystery. Thank you for listening to Solo Stories number 18, The Last Hike by Meeks. We also want to thank you for tuning in to the Red Eye Hour. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We will see you next time here at the Red Eye Hour and Solo Stories by Meeks.